Hello. Okay, so social studies we're going to do first. As you're recognizing, I'm sorry. I changed that from the day plan today, but it's actually okay because we don't have a Zoom today anyway, because you guys are just working on getting your projects ready or getting your information ready for when we do meet tomorrow for a Zoom. So I figured to do social studies first today because it's going to give you a little bit more time to work through like basically what you need to have for the project for your group tomorrow, rather than like 2 o'clock might be tempted to be like, okay, I've watched the lesson, yeah, I'll think about it for 2 minutes and then just like not really do it. So I think this is better for your use of time. Okay, so a couple people who weren't there yesterday, I'm just going to give a quick explanation of what we're doing. So as you guys will have seen on Edmodo, I put you into groups. Okay, that's going to be helpful for you compiling this. So hopefully yesterday you guys were all able to determine who is going to do which of the pillars, who's going to be responsible for which pillar. And in a really, really, really well-functioning democracy, these pillars would all be very, very strong, and they would all support the system of democracy. And that's why this visual representation is what it's showing. That when all of these pillars are in place, all four of them, then that's when we have a strong democracy. And as we've learned about in ancient Athens and the Iroquois, they did have some parts were good of democracy, of their democracies. They were the first forms of democracy. But then other parts of it weren't really so good. And that's why the governments and the systems of the world and countries have evolved over time. And as we learn, like even, I guess as we learned even like with Magna Carta, that kind of has to do a little bit with like, kind of with justice a little bit anyway. They wanted there to be more fair and equal justice, and that to be a strength of the society, because they saw that as a weakness, because King John had all this power, and the people, the barons, were like, why are you taxing us and like buying all of your amazing stuff for just you, and then making us like not even able to fish? So they wanted to have him, and like the lasting legacy of the Magna Carta was to have the rules apply to everyone, regardless of who you are. So it kind of was there, but then it wasn't really. So it went under all these different revisions. And this is also what like countries around the world are kind of constantly like striving to do, is to make their country a better place to live in so that the people want to be there. And there's some countries in the world that do a very good job of that. And there's some countries in the world that are maybe still developing in that. And like Nelson Mandela would have been a really amazing example of someone who really thought that like all of these pillars was not the case in South Africa. So he wanted there to be more of all of this. Like he saw huge problems behind everything. So his job, and the same, even like, yeah, anyone who's like, even Malala, like she would have been another example of someone who thought that like, yeah, like equity isn't really happening right now, and she wanted that to be like better in her society. So what you're doing in this project as a group, but mainly like for today individually, depending upon the pillar that you have specifically, your job is to become an expert on it. So I'm just going to show this again in like large zoomed up motion here. Okay, so the first thing is, okay, we did this yesterday, each person becomes an expert on one pillar. Now as a group, you're going to create a model or display that shows this. Now, kind of like this is in the background for today, the model or display. Now today we're going to get into like you doing your work, actually figuring out what you can show for this, for each of your specific pillar. And then tomorrow, hopefully you have all of this stuff, like all of the work done. Like today's actually really the most work out of all the days of social studies this week, so why I'm giving us more time for it. And then tomorrow, you guys can come together and say, okay, well, how do we want to share? Like, what could our model, what could our display, what could our method of presentation be? So these are the things that have to be included for each of the different pillars, okay? First one is so simple. All you have to do is just look up in the textbook. I think it was on page 5, like right at the very beginning. And it says, so you have to just say, what is the definition of this pillar? So what does the definition of this pillar stand for? There's like little blocks at the bottom, so you just basically have to write that in. One little side note is the people who were doing equity, notice this is not equality, okay? They're different. And you guys who have equity, you need to do a little bit of a special job of searching what the difference between equity and equality is. That's a very, very important distinction for your definition, okay? All right. The rest of them should be kind of like not too bad to describe. Justice, you should say what is involved in the justice system. So there's a couple different components. That one also might take a little bit more looking. Okay, so anyway, once you're done that, then the next parts are this. How can this pillar be made stronger? So like, how would it be made fortified? If we're like actually like building this, we want to have a lot, like really strengthen our justice system. What would that take? Like, what would it take as a country or a leader or someone who's in charge of this pillar to make sure that it is strong? And then you're like, yeah, like we know it's not going to crumble. We know that it's going to do its job and everyone's going to see it as a strength in our society. So what could be done to make it stronger? Okay. Then boom, total opposite. What real life examples would cause this pillar to weaken or crumble or develop cracks? Okay. So that's kind of like this example. Like there's a lot kind of that is in a democracy. In an ideal world, we would have these really strong, but like in actual sense, there are cracks. There are cracks in these pillars. So I want you to think about some examples of what could possibly result in a crack, or what could possibly result in that pillar not being very strong, or that pillar like crumbling as like the ultimate worst. So yeah, what would that look like in a society? So even think of like, you could go like total catastrophic, but that's almost like, okay, there is no justice. Okay, think like what would cause, say that you've done a lot of this work building it up, what would even cause like little tiny cracks that could eventually lead to more destruction? Like that's the type of thinking that like I want you to think of, rather than just like, oh, there is none of it. Okay, that's like too easy to say. What would be a real life example? Okay, so that is your job, and it's not going to really work to like type this into Google. You have to think about it. You have to understand. That's why the definition of that pillar is the most important. You could even do a little bit of reading surrounding those pages to kind of like help get a couple of ideas going. Yeah. And even if you think to like ancient Athens and the Iroquois, you could probably think of examples to even draw from those societies in either direction. Like ancient Athens, like, let's talk about like representation. Like what was a strength of their representation? Iroquois, what was a strength of their representation? And then maybe like, okay, what would cause representation to not be as good? Like what might kind of happen? Okay, so that's just going to get you thinking. I'll come to your groups tomorrow to have further discussions, but I really want you guys to think about this. I don't know why the camera does this. Anyway, whatever. So yeah, just think about that today. That's basically just your main goal. Okay. And I suggest that you have some notes. Don't spend time typing this up or like making this look elaborate. Just have ideas now, because I can pretty much guarantee tomorrow when we go to the groups, you might change or you might have things added on once you start talking as a group about this. Okay. That's it. Very good. See you soon.